I slowly approached the door, turned the handle, and tilted my head between the gap of the door and the panel. I could see nothing, as there was only a few candles lighting the corridor. I opened the door a bit more and squeezed through the gap. As I walked down the corridor, I heard moaning and groaning, but it was not the boy. The voice was older, mature. Maybe it was the bearded man, but again, there was more than one tone that groaned out. There were several doors on my left and right, so I stepped cautiously up to the first one and slowly opened it. I was confronted with a macabre scene. A light shone down from the ceiling, highlighting a man caged into an armchair. Metal grids held down his arms, legs, and connected his face to the back of the chair. His mouth was wide open, his tongue was missing. Was this possible? The man that he had said he killed. Maybe when they talked too much, he removed them, as well as the offending article. As I walked closer to him, I was unprepared for his reaction as he jumped up and down towards me. He managed with demonic ability to free the chair from the ground, and he came straight at me. I jumped back, slammed the door, trapping his finger, but the weight of the door shut it close. But the finger I noticed sticking out the door frame was not solid. It was as if there had never been any muscle or blood within it. I moved down the corridor and entered another room. This was empty, but again there was a chair and a light turned off hanging above. The next door I found a man on a rack, his body stretched. One of his ribs stuck out through his skin. The man did not seem to breathe or move, but I felt he was alive. Maybe his stomach was so outstretched that the breathing could not be easily seen. His hands dropped by his side. There inside his nails I saw splinters of wood shoved in, which even I felt the pain as I saw. I went closer to his face and looked at it battered, of which all recognition of who he was must surely have gone. I found a knob at the end of the table and turned it, and his body slowly relaxed, but the length remained. How long he had been there I do not know. Then he regained consciousness and started to scream out in pain. I tried to place my hands on him to console him, but nothing could be done. I could not let him carry on screaming. I wondered if it had been my releasing the pressure that had put the pain on his body, and I reluctantly turned the knob tighter. As I did so, I heard his bones crack. His rib bone, which had popped back inside his chest, stuck out again, and he stopped screaming. Oh, what horror is this, to have to inflict torture on a man in order for him to cease his suffering. I tried one more room in which I heard noise. I opened the door. There on what looked like a surgeon's operating table lay a man, his stomach wide open. There was a metal contraption holding his stomach apart, and cling film was placed over the hole in his stomach to stop the blood from seeping out. One assumed in order to allow the man to suffer the pain he wished to inflict, rather than allowing him the less painful and quicker death of bleeding to death. Both to me seemed utterly unbearable, but to the man on the table I suspect he would choose for himself the quicker death. Above the metal contraption there was what looked like a circular metal rod. It was wired to a battery that lay on the floor next to the table. What it was for I was not sure, and there was nothing on it, and it didn't seem to be connected to the man. I walked over to him. He appeared unconscious. Maybe at this time he was finally dead. I peered through the cling film, but could not see much inside. His heart indeed had ceased. He was thankfully dead. I was about to walk out of the room when I slipped on something. I placed my hand out to ease my fall. The nearest thing to me was the man. My hand pierced the cling film, and dark red blood poured down the floor. As it did so, I noticed what I had slipped on. It looked like a roll of uncooked sausages. I picked them up and noticed the length was astounding, and then with full ferocity I realized what they were, and what the circular metal rod was. These were the poor man's intestines. This metal rod connected to the battery must have slowly wound them out of his body. I dropped them immediately back on the blood-stained floor and slipped myself out of this room. In the final room that I entered, I found a truly macabre sight. The room on first glance looked completely empty, and I was on my way to walk out when some spotlights caught my attention. Near the far wall of this room, I walked closer, and the lights revealed the truly horrible sight. There on the wall were 6 human bodies. Their legs were pacing in the air. The bodies hung up by chains wrapped around a metal beam high up. The tops of their heads were missing, sliced off, I reckoned, judging by the smooth and straight line left. I could see wires trailing on the ground connected to the generator. I followed the wires which led to their brains. I could only imagine that he had wired this up himself. How he would know which impulse in the brain would make a man walk. I imagined how he might have sliced the first man, placed his cold fingers into the jelly-like brain matter, moved his index finger one way or another, and to see what reaction it got, until he was with his hands in between the man's brain to get him to walk. What kind of evil could do such a barbaric thing? How could any man's stomach do such an act? How could any man's stomach do such an act? But not only to have he done so, he had also put them in a row and spot-lit, as if he was setting up some work of art, a showpiece almost. I tugged at the wires, and with a splodge they came out. On the floor lay the wire clip, still holding onto a bit of red brain tissue. The legs immediately stopped their in-air pacing, and I turned the spotlights off and shut the door tight. I walked through the corridor. There was at least 6 other rooms which lay behind the doors I did not have the stomach to see. It was as if I had walked in on a torture chamber of the past. Such cruelty to ever have been inflicted on one's fellow men seemed even more barbaric now that it was not commonplace. I was at the end of the corridor, and by a staircase I went up it, and found myself in what appeared some kind of living room in a very old house. I could see a light was on northward. I slowly walked there, and in the kitchen I could see the young boy and the bearded man eating off the same plate. The bearded man seemed agitated, as if he knew I was there. I stayed as still and quiet as it is humanly possible. He turned to face the door, and seemed to be sniffing something. He leaped out of his chair and for the door. I was unable to move in time, and he found me by its side. He was furious, as I'd never seen such a man. As if I had walked on some event I could not have seen. Maybe he did not want me to see the compassion that lay within him as he shared his meal with his young capture. He threw me across the room, his eyes full of pure rage. The boy came running out to see what was going on. The man, not having time to restrain the boy, launched his left arm out, catching the boy full on the face, throwing him to the ground unconscious. As the bearded man saw where he landed, I used this opportunity of him not looking toward me to get up and charge at him. As I approached him, he turned to see me, but it was too late, and we both flew across the living room, sliding across the table and onto the floor. We tumbled across the floor. He managed to get himself on top of me and laid a punch on my nose. "Do you think you can beat me? When I finish with you, you will wish you had stayed in the cellar. Why must they all turn against me? All I wanted was a little company." "You can't force company," I exclaimed. "The more angry I become, the greater pain you shall suffer before your death. You think I'm scared of a man who kidnaps children. He was alone like you, wandering these lonely streets, and so I saved him from his own misery. I gave him love and affection. He is my son now, mine. You make me sick. You think you can get away with anything you like above the law, above the common decency of men. Let me tell you, today it ends. Today it ends." I lifted my leg from below him and thrusted him into the wall behind us. His body slid down the wall onto the floor, and he did not move again. I went over to the boy and lifted his limp body up. His eyes slowly opened, but the shine that I had seen there before was gone. Then his eyes widened up again, but they were looking beyond me. Before I had time to look around to see what it was that caught his stare, I felt a wire pulled tight around my throat. The bearded man had awoken. From his pocket he had taken out his more conveniently sized torch items. It felt like some kind of wire. He tugged on it once more, and I felt trickles of blood hit my lowered hands. The wire had cut into the outer layers of my skin. I felt my whole body cease, my eyes bulge. My throat unable to swallow or breathe heavily, afraid of allowing the wire to penetrate further into my supple throat.